Danae, and I'm glad to see so many of you here today who joined us for this financial literacy workshop. We really want to make sure that this is a very helpful event for you. I am the job coach for BrookLynk, and I also want to let you know, so if you do not want to have your videos on, you do not have to have them on. This will be recorded for educational purposes and for social media for people to catch up on. So I'm going to pass it on to Kayman. He's going to introduce himself, and then Preenon will introduce himself as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Danae. Hey, everyone. I'm Kayman Sykes. I am from Tupelo, Mississippi. I am here right now. I work for Ameriprise Financial. I'm really here today just to empower people. Some of the things that I didn't know as a teenager and as a young adult growing up, I don't want you to make the same mistakes that I may have made. So I hope that you all will get something out of this, and please feel free to ask any questions that you may. This session is for you, to empower you for your financial success. And I'll pass it over to Preenon to tell about himself. Preenon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Preenon Huq. I'm an accountant with Metro Transit. I've worked a couple other jobs throughout my time at college, and one of the things that is special about me is I went to college and graduated with no debt, and I was featured on Next Gen Personal Finance. If you aren't familiar with them, I definitely recommend checking them out. They're a leading financial education company, nonprofit, educating, providing teachers with resources across the country to make it so then financial education is free and financial literacy. And then also that my goal in life is to bring financial education to my community and helping others. And then I created a scholarship at my local high school that I graduated from with the help of one of the teachers, and we raised over $2,500 this past year. I think we almost raised $3,000 and hoping to do that yearly.
That's awesome. Well, again, I'm Kayman. So talking about financial inclusion. So what I do every day is I ensure, well, I deal with certain grants, something called Fair Housing Act, a framework called fair lending, which means how do banks really treat people who need access to credit versus the ones who have traditionally accessed credit and the ways they have done it. So ECOA says, Equal Credit Opportunity Act, that you can't discriminate on the basis of religion, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and so many other things. So really, what is financial inclusion? And I think that looks really different depending upon who you're talking to. Some people under the age of 40, like millennials, we use our app. For my mom and dad, who are baby boomers, they prefer to go into a traditional bank. So really, what does it mean to be financially literate? For me, I think that looks different as I grow older. For example, what are the products and services do I need? How much does it cost to access credit? So thinking about what is the interest rate? I have $10,000 worth of student loans right now, but only because I learned at an early age of what my sister went through, who is 33 and I'm 26. She has $60,000 in student loans. So really looking at the degree that I had or that I have, I actually switched over to I majored in biochemistry, so I went to be a trauma surgeon. Well, no one told me that trauma surgeons had $1.2 million of student loans. Yeah, they make $200,000 a year, but what does that equal out to? So really, what is financial access? What is financial inclusion? And what does that look like for you in your future? What are your goals? I want to let you know that I never thought I would be in banking. After taking all these science classes and majoring in biochemistry, but for you to empower people like me who did not have access to financial inclusion, this is why I'm here. This is why banking is so important. So my roles and responsibilities goes back to working with our and business partners to make sure that people that look like you, people that may look like your mom and dad, or that may be in particular financial situations are treated fairly. So I think it's really important to really think about what is the cost of an overdraft fee? What does your financial picture look like? What is saving? What is investing? And I can turn over to Preenon. Maybe he can talk about what he has done in his previous time to really talk about saving and investing, and really what does that look like for him, and how your maybe financial picture may look different.
Thank you for that, Kayman. A lot of the things that I've done over the time is starting with like a goal, like knowing like how much is it going to cost, and like everything. What's nice is with the internet and different resources, you can kind of figure out what other people have done or what they've gone through. So like for example, for my college, for the cost of college, the average student at the time was graduating with about 28 to $30,000 in debt, and so I knew that between the 4 years that I was going to go to school, that would be about $7,000. But another thing that I did is that I was like, okay, if that's the cost of college, and this was in my junior year that I looked into this, I was like, well, why don't I start saving now? And one of my friends actually, before he was a year older, he went to college and he saved $10,000 before going to college, working for McDonald's and Solo's Pizza, working part time. He didn't have a ton of expenses besides like food and gas at the time, which obviously helped in his favor. And I know a lot of other people have higher expenses or they're helping out with their families and other things. But overall, it's just kind of like based on your situation, taking full advantage of that. And when he told me that, I was like, well, if you can save 10 grand, like, why can't I? So that was like a big part of what jump started me into it. And then it was kind of figuring out like, okay, $10,000 over the next year, as I got to make a little bit under $1,000 a month. And so like, how am I going to do that? And so I was working at McDonald's and I was working at TCF Bank. And then in the summertime, you're working a lot more hours. You're able to get as many, make as much money as possible. And then, in the summertime, maybe I was making $1,200 a month. And then during the school year, I'm making, half that because I'm not working as many hours. That was a big part of it for me. And then that was kind of a jump start on that. But then when I got to college, it was like, I always tell people the biggest thing is that you shouldn't strain yourself, and you have to remember your priorities. So priority number one is, why am I here? I'm here for school. I want an education, because that $28,000. If you're just like, I'm just trying to make $28,000, and you forget about the whole educational part, it's going to be difficult for you to get a job, and you might as well have not even gone to school, because that financially was your goal, not necessarily the education. And so what I did is I was like, okay, I need to make about $7,000 a year. And then at the time, if you just say like minimum wage is about $10 an hour, I know it's a little bit more than a lot of jobs are paying, between 13 and 15, but you work 15 hours a week. So that's in the, you don't want to take too much time out of your life. You want to have fun, you want to enjoy, have a lot of good experiences. But you could work a Friday night, a 5 to 10 shift. You could work a Saturday, maybe a 9 to 2, and then same thing on Sunday, and you still have plenty of time in the day. While a lot of my friends were like, they wake up late or they don't have a lot of things to do in the morning, you just jumpstart your day with something like that, and it's fun. You meet a lot of people, you get a lot of good experience, and then with the $10 an hour, 15 hours a week, you're making $150 a week, and then you multiply that by how many weeks there are, that's $7,500. I know that there's tax and other things that are included in that, and that doesn't even include like the summertime when you can work extra hours and do internships. You'll have about $7,000 per each year. So if you break it down, like, well, I can work 5 hours a week or 15 hours a week and do that and still have fun and enjoy myself. Because, at 10 o'clock, most people in college aren't even going out till about 11 or 12 even sometimes. So it's just being
Yeah.
being realistic with yourself and knowing what's important to you in your financial goals. Like to add is like, finding a job that's relevant to like what you want to do and kind of getting the very entry level of what you're looking at. So whether you want, like you were talking about being a doctor, like if you wanted to do that, working in the hospital, even as a receptionist or a scribe or something that helping out, you're going to be able to get in that environment and maybe you'll learn a little bit more about it. But maybe you want to become a chef or something, right? But you don't know necessarily if you wanted to go to culinary school. Being able to work in that environment and knowing like the hours, like a lot of chefs are working, during dinner time. That's when they're making the most money, and that's when they're um, also like putting out their best product. But do you really want to do that the rest of your life when you have kids and other things, right? So kind of figuring that out. And if you're working those entry level jobs, you're still working the same hours they are, and then you can kind of feel for yourself, do I want to do this?
So, like, just to add on to your point, talking about saving and that literally every piece counts, and also shifting to really having access to credit, I think is one of the biggest things. How do you get a savings account? How do you get a checking account? Who's in your community, who in your community may have a checking account? I know for some of my cousins, they still don't have a checking account to this day. And even when they were trying to get assistance, um, for for like the PPP, or they were trying to get assistance unemployment, they could not get assistance because they didn't have a basic checking account. So I'm curious, from your point of view, um, how did you really start saving? When did you realize that it was important to, to save, Preenon? I know my saving story looked a little bit different. When my dad developed cancer and I sat out of college for a semester, I realized how important financial security was, when he wasn't working. Well, they made enough, but if it wasn't for my parents, I would have been in trouble. So when did you realize that financial inclusion, or really just having a basic checking account, was important?
Mine started with my neighbor Lloyd. He's 75 now, and he's a millionaire. I mean, he became a millionaire from working as a teacher. Him and his wife both were teachers, so they didn't make a lot of money. They didn't come from money. They did a lot of their things on their own, and being able to be like skillful and like if you have a repair in your house, or like not be having to call a plumber, and everything has just become more and more expensive. So the things that you can do yourself has helped a lot, or has helped a lot of people save. One of the things that most people, and this is specifically towards a lot of people of color, is that we don't have the resources and knowledge about Roth IRAs and just retirement accounts. Like, a lot of our parents are immigrants, my parents included. Um, Even if you're a very wealthy immigrant that makes maybe $100,000 a year, if you come to this country at age 40, somebody who's been making like $30,000 to $40,000 15 years before you will actually have more money than you by far. And the only way to really catch up on that is taking your $100,000 salary and putting away about 20,000 a year, and then when you're at 50, 55, putting away even more than that to beat out somebody like that. And so my parents, because my dad came to this country when he was about 40, he doesn't have that. So he has to do other things in terms of savings and retirement. And a lot of other countries, like my family's from Bangladesh, it's very expensive now, or it's becoming more expensive to retire back there. So if you're not doing a lot of these retirement things that a lot of these early companies do, you're not even going to be able to retire in your home country just because of how expensive it's become. And the thing is that I learned a little bit about it in school. They kind of mention it, but if you put away about $200 away a month, at age 18, which is, it's a lot of money, you will be a millionaire, right? And so when I was talking to Lloyd, I actually wanted to buy a car when I was making all this money at TCF and McDonald's, but I felt like a lot, pulling in $1,000 a month, and as a 17, 18-year-old, and I was going to buy like a Mercedes Benz. And then he was like, well, you know what? If you take that same money and you put it in here, you would have this much money. And that was about 7.5 years ago. So say if the Mercedes cost, I don't know, 30,000 at the time, if I would have done that same 30,000 that I was going to spend on that car is worth about 10 right now. That same amount of money that I would have invested is worth 60,000. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. So with what I did is, that day that he told me that, when I turned 18, I was like, all right, I'm going to put away $500 a month or basically $200, $200 to $300 away a month at age 18. And then when I get a proper job that can pay me a little bit more, that's full time, then and when I mean by proper, I mean like you can really do anything. Like if you want to I work at Best Buy part time. If you work at Best Buy and you work full time there, that's fine too. You don't have to go to college. You don't have to do those kind of things to be able to put the money away. And even if you like want to travel the world and do all that stuff, if you start with a Roth IRA, you'll still have enough for retirement, but you just have to hit that bare minimum of $200 a month at the beginning of your life. And then the more you do, the better it is.
Talking about savings is really important because I was just reading a CNBC, I believe that's what it's called, an article actually about saving, and 65% of Americans don't have like anything in their account as far as savings goes. So that's super important to start off early in your life to really get a hold of your finances. So a question Catrice posed was, what is a retirement account? Like, when should you start saving? What is a Roth IRA? So there's a lot of different acronyms. So please specify on that for our group.
I'll take the really what is saving, and then I'll let Preenon, who really understands, he has a great explanation about retirement accounts and really how to save for each individual. To me, savings should be started by your parents if they have the opportunity, teaching you really every penny that you have is to empower you. For example, when thinking about a $10 candy bar, no one really tells you about, if you started a savings account, what $2 would do in a time where you might not even have a dollar. So for instance, when I was about 10 years old, my grandmother gave me $100. When when I came up on hard times, and at this time my dad was around, but he really wasn't around. Times got hard. That simple $100 that she had given me, I had went to buy some Jordans. Well, I don't know about you, but Jordans does not really empower me to really do what I needed to do. And I learned, actually, looking back 2 months ago, if that $100 that I could have saved instead of buying Jordans would have turned it over to I think like $5,000 today, if it was just in a simple savings account that had a compounded interest, or if I was saving for my college, such as a 501 plan. But thinking about saving, it should be started as soon as possible. The smallest number can turn into $100, which turns into $150, which turns into $500, which over the course of 10 years, if you look at compounded interest, just look at the calculators. You may have even like $5,000, $10,000 in the future. But when talking about a 401k or a Roth IRA, today taxes are as cheap as they has been in a very long time. So a retirement account, a Roth IRA, and keep me honest, Preenon, they take the taxes out of a Roth early. And so you use that, what you have already paid on taxes, the amount that you have left goes into an account that builds interest and makes and individuals make investments, and you have a return. To really describe how the particulars, I'll turn it over to Preenon. Maybe he can give a better understanding of really how does that work.
So I'd say a couple things, like for example, like the savings one, starting early. That's exactly how you should do it. Like my sister's 10, and one thing we did is we just got her like a money jar to put her coins in, and then she can see like how much extra that's there. I've seen people use like a milk jug and then just fill it up with coins, and then they kind of like put lines of how much roughly that would be. And then you just watch it kind of grow. I mean, you can do things like that. The other thing is when you do your checking account and your savings, you can split your paycheck. You can do that through your employer, or you could also, one thing that I like to do is like, I like to give myself what I call it as allowance. So every paycheck I get, say if I make $500, I think of how much money I need for the next 2 weeks before I need my next paycheck. So I'll give myself maybe $100, and I'm like, yep, that'll be enough for food, gas, groceries, whatever. And then the next time I get paid, and then that $400 goes into my savings account. That way, when I'm making a purchase, it makes it a lot easier to like make it a thought process. If I have $500 in one account and I want to buy a pair of shoes that's 120, it's not that much. I mean, it's 1/5 of the amount, which doesn't feel like a lot. But it's kind of like if you have $5 and you want to spend $1, it's not quite that much. But say if you have $2 now in your hand, and yeah, maybe you have the other three in your car, but in your hand you got $2 and you're going to give somebody $1, that's a lot of money. That's half of the money, and maybe you won't make that purchase and you'll think twice about it, right? And so like doing like little things like that makes a huge difference. When it comes to the retirement account, basically the way that our US system is that your employer as well as you, every time you get paid, a little bit of money goes into this separate account. They really try to discourage you from taking the money out of that account, but some people still do. There's ways of taking it out, but there's penalties if times get tough. I mean, the thing is like you kind of put it away and you don't think about it, and it's gonna grow. So when I was saying like $200 away a month for the rest of your life, that would be roughly, about 40 to $50,000 that you would have put in, maybe more than that. But because of this thing called compounding interest, and I would encourage everybody to write this down because it's pretty hard to explain. But a short version of it is just your money doubles every 7 years. So the more money you put in, the more that it can double over your lifetime. And most people start this about, it's really good if you can start at 25, but I would say most people start at about 30. And if you start at 25, but if you can start at 18, that's one more double. So say if you have $1 million at your account at age 65, if it can double one more time by starting at 18, because that's 7 more years, you'll have $2 million, right? And just by starting that much earlier. And so when it comes to the retirement accounts and knowing which one to start, most employers, a lot of them won't even let you start the first year at your job. So that's something to look into. If your employer doesn't allow you to do that, you can do what's called a Roth IRA, which is the individual retirement account. When it's through your employer, it's usually called a 401k or a 403b. Something else to look into if you're taking notes, just because we don't have a lot of time today. But then with like the Roth IRA, it's your own retirement account that you have control over. I mean, you can literally take the whole amount and put it in an Apple stock or something crazy if you wanted to. But overall, you'd want to diversify. And if you don't know how to do that, I mean, there's hundreds and thousands of accounts. Just the simplest way is the S&P 500. So that's the 500 of the U.S. top companies. And to start this Roth IRA, you should be looking at companies like Fidelity, Vanguard, Charles Schwab. You kind of want to stay away from companies like Northwestern Mutual, Thrivent, Edward Jones. Like these companies can help you later down the road, but when you're first starting out, they charge a lot of fees, and then their contracts are sometimes term contracts, and you don't really necessarily need that. You just kind of need a little bit of guidance, and you can call a company like Fidelity. I like to use Fidelity just because they have a physical location here in Minnesota, actually 2 or 3 locations. So it's kind of nice to be able to go in there and talk to somebody and help guide you. And these people love to do that. Um, One other thing I know that Kajua asked a question about, like encourage more financial conversations within like the immigrant and refugee communities. I think it's really difficult, honestly. Like even with my own my own dad, who's is very frugal, he saves a lot of money, who's like makes, I mean, he'll literally drive, he used to drive like an extra 5 miles to save 10 cents on gas because time is like irrelevant for him. He's got so much time after work because he doesn't have a lot of hobbies to do, which I would tell him like, but dad, you drive that distance, you lose half the money because you're driving a little bit further. Like you should still value your time. But he would like go to all the different locations, still does, like look at their prices on the coupons. And so he's not the type of person that would go to Target and buy all the groceries there just because he's there. He knows Cub Foods is across the street. He'll buy his list of things on his grocery list. These are the things that need to be purchased from Target. These are the things that need to be purchased from Cub Foods, and then these are the things that need to be purchased from Aldi's. That's saved him thousands and thousands of dollars over the years. I mean, if you consistently keep doing that, but having the conversation with even like the Roth IRA and telling him what I'm doing, he didn't really understand. Like he didn't really understand until because the retirement stuff is so different in other countries and backgrounds. So I had to kind of do it and then show him. Another thing about financial, like just finances with immigrants and refugees, it's really hard to understand this, but you kind of have to be selfish a little bit off the bat. You need to really I like to think of it as like the oxygen mask when the plane is going down, right? Like they always tell you put put your own mask on first before helping others. And it's the same thing when it comes to these finances, because if you're financially helping and keeping everybody stable in your family, it's very hard for you to be able to put more money towards towards like your future and growing money and having it double and stuff. Where one thing that I did is that I saved a significant amount of money for my family. Like I saved about $45,000 over the last 2 3 years from my job because I was heavily saving, and then I used that money to help my parents buy a new house. So you can, and then I could have gave my parents maybe $1,000 here each month and helped them with different things, but instead I used the money and my own knowledge of what and how to be responsible with it, and then took that and then grew it and then gave it to them later and then helped them make a financial responsible purchase, which is a lot better. But I've read about how like people of color specifically have had a lot of issues that they're actually worse off sometimes when they go to college, because what happens is that a lot of their family members think that they're the lottery winner basically. So like they'll come out of school, they'll be making $50,000 opposed to the 40 that they would have made maybe not going to college and then becoming a higher level position and in like a more of a frontline job. But then their families asking them for more money, and so then their families like asking them to help out and all these things, where like now their $50,000 salary, they're helping out everybody out, they're really only making like 35 or 32,000, maybe even less than that. And they end up actually having more stress and being in a worse position because they're trying to help everybody. But instead, what you should be doing is taking that extra 15,000, maybe putting it towards a Roth, or putting it into different investment accounts, mutual funds. Index funds are very important. Another thing to write down, and using that money to grow over the next 4 to 5 years, and then taking this lump sum and then helping them out if you'd like to.
So, Preenon, I have a question. So it's similar to Ms. Zua, I believe that's who that is. She basically she's looking for advice to say, how do you encourage financial conversations with immigrant/refugee communities when your parents may really be reluctant to really not put that money in a bank or to talk about money? I know my dad is 69 years old. And so he has, I call it the under the bed philosophy, where all his savings basically go under the bed. How do you encourage your parents who may have a different perspective than you do in this millennial age? How do you encourage them to maybe talk about money or consider opening a checking account or a basic savings account?
You really have to lead by example. I think that's the biggest thing. Like even with somebody like my dad who's like willing to like, drive all this extra distance and to save some money, when it comes to like, I told him to switch to Discover a couple of years ago because to Discover online banks were giving out like 1 to 2%. At one point they were giving out 2%, which is a lot of money. I mean, on like the money that I had saved, I think I had like 50,000 in the bank. I was making an extra almost $100 a month, right? Like that's a lot of money to just saving and compounding. Where my dad was using Wells Fargo, he's been with them for 30 plus years. And I'm telling him like, you should switch to this other bank, and they're going to be able to give you a lot more. They're going to give you a lot more, like $100 a month if you use the same amount of money you have, versus Wells Fargo's not doing anything for you. And he was like, not really convinced. And then I showed him my bank statement. I'm like, literally, Dad, every first of every month I'm getting an extra $100. Like, how can you say no to that? And that's when he changed, right? So like, it's kind of like showing that it's possible. And it kind of goes back to the same thing with the Roth IRA. I'm telling my dad, like, I'm going to be putting away $6,000 a year, and I'm going to put away like 19,000 when I first start my first job. And that's really hard to do. I mean, you're making a lot of sacrifices, especially even though you're making more money, and you have student loans and other things, but it's worth it. And again, he's like, well, don't strain yourself. And I'm like, well, I'm not. And I'm adjusting to a certain lifestyle too, because if you don't know any better about, if I came out of school, I made $63,000 or like $60,000. Before that, I never made that much money in my entire life. I'm used to making like 20, maybe 30 on a good year. So obviously there's a lot more expenses that come up when you graduate if you want to move out and things, but still I was making about 30 at most. So to me, if I put away 19,000 my first year making 60, really I'm making 40, I'm still better off, right? So if you're doing that, it's like, okay, well, I didn't need that 19,000 anyways. And then later down the road, once you've done, you don't have to put away that much. Even if you do 10 or put a little bit more towards your savings later down the road, you kind of look at it and you're like, well, I'm used to living off of 30,000. But the problem, what happens is a lot of people, they come out of school, they're making 60,000 and they're living off of like that 60,000, and then they want to get all this extra stuff, and like then it's like, oh shoot, I don't have the money for those other things. So kind of just adjusting your lifestyle, and there's like memes about it where it's like, how do I have $1,000 and I blow it in 2 days, but then in 2 weeks later I have $5 and I can make it last, 7 days, right? And it's kind of the same philosophy on that.
I think that just brings to me like Amazon was my kryptonite, and I had to learn to stay off of there. I had to learn to stop subscribing to stuff. Don't send me any emails. I had to really assess my situation. And I think that's what a lot of younger people need to do is like be realistic about, the jobs that you're getting is entry level. Like how can you save up and how can you use your money in the best way? Because money is a tool and you want to be able to use it effectively. There is a question for high school students here. How did you come out of college without any debt, Preenon? And then what are some good, bad debts to consider? And I think this question could be for both you and Kayman.
So I would say like with the coming out of school without any debt, I kind of touched a little bit on it, but like working a part-time job, like people, I mean, it's sad, but they almost like spit on you when they talk about, my first job was McDonald's, right? Like I'm like making $7 an hour. They're like, oh, you work at McDonald's? And I'm like, yeah, like, I like it. I learned a lot of skills. A lot of those skills still today have transferred over to things that I do, like the fast pace, the good customer service, the quality, compensating when you do something wrong, and understanding those customer service skills have all like helped me grow as a person. And basically what I would do is like before I had bills and a lot of responsibility, I tackled what was to come. So I was preparing myself. I knew that one day that I'm going to have a mortgage and rent and have all these things. So it's like, okay, why don't I act like those are the things that I have? So like if you want to buy a car, for example, right? If you want a brand new car, usually the loan on that is 5 years. If you're 17 and you're like, okay, how much is it to buy a car, a $12,000 car? The payment on it's probably $116 a month. And then on top of that, you have to pay the insurance. So why don't you start saving $200 away a month now and seeing what you can do? Maybe you don't make enough now to be able to do that, but try to. And even if you can make half that work. So if you can do $100 a month and you do that for the next 5 years, you'll have half the money for the car and you put that towards the down payment. So it's kind of like you're already trying to save and live like you like it's like trying to pay for that product before you actually have it in your hands, and then you just have more down on it. Some good and bad debt, like student loans are actually one of the best debts that you can have. It's a conversation people don't understand, but the student loans, and I'm not talking about private loans, but federal loans, the loans might be at like 4% or something depending on your credit, but they're the most forgiving. If you like lose your job or something happens, or we're in a pandemic right now, there's no interest on them. You don't have to make a payment. Even if we weren't in a pandemic and you lost your job, you can call them up and say, hey, I just lost my job. I don't know when I'm going to pay. And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll put it on pause for the next 3 months. I mean, no other loan will let you do that. So yeah, maybe it's 4% and car loans are 2%. And so you're paying a little bit more on the money. But the thing is that with that student loan, like if my car payment, if I can't afford it, I can't call the bank and be like, hey, I'm in financial trouble. You kind of can, but sometimes it doesn't work out as well as you want it to. But versus a student loan, student loans are really forgiving and help and like trying to help you. So even if you have the student loans, and this takes self-discipline, but instead of taking the student loans and paying off the full amount quickly, what you should be doing is, say if your student loan payment's $300 a month, but you can put down 600 towards it after you graduated, don't put $600 towards your student loans. Take the 300 and put it towards your student loan, just like normal, the regular payment, and then put the other $300 towards a savings account, one with high interest, like high yield savings account. Before, like I was saying, that other account had 2%. So really, you're really just borrowing money at 2%. You can never find a loan that's under 2%. I mean, unless you have a 0% interest rate, but then they do it with the car and there's depreciation and all this other stuff. But overall, the biggest thing is that's not a bad debt to have. Bad debts to have is like credit card debt. Another bad debt to have is like payday loans. Like, I mean, those are criminal, honestly. And kind of thinking of, I'm trying to think if there's any other debts. That medical bills are kind of like the ones that you want to pay towards and things. But different companies have different levels of like sympathy. So like if you're in hard financial times, you can actually negotiate and work with them. I had a friend who was, in significant debt, credit card debt. I think he was like $2,000 or $3,000 in debt. And
Mhm.
like the collections kept calling him and all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, like, why don't you just, like, I helped him save some money and we were there. And then I told him, call up the company and tell him, like, hey, look, I owe $3,000 with all these fees and all this other stuff. How about I give you $1,500 and we call it even? And I'll give you $1,500 today. They'll do it. I would be shocked if they don't. I mean, or they'll try to negotiate with you. Even maybe offer 1,200 and see if they'll go for that. And if they don't, or if they do, then be like, okay, I'll offer you 1,500. And more than likely they will, because they don't want to call you either. They just want the money in their hands and they want to be done with this. So there are ways to negotiate a lot of different purchases.
So yeah, I want to speak to really to that bad debt, such as like the payday loans. If to me, I describe a payday loan as a loan that you don't get from a bank. If your parents or if anyone's like my family where they go to maybe a store that doesn't offer a checking account, they don't allow me to secure the loan with some type of collateral. Looking at payday loans, just for example, if you make a 200 and if you borrow $250 from a payday loan center, they're going to charge you $10 to cash that check. They're going to just to give you the check. So in total, you'll end up paying like if it's like 199%, what is usually like $315. Think about 250 and $350. If you go to a regular bank where you say, hey, I want to build credit, or I need this loan for X amount of reason. Well, that $300 that you would have paid, if it's on a 3-month term, you would have only paid, depending on the percentage rate or the interest rate, you would have paid like $275 or $300. Think about the difference over a 3-month period. That's $50. So, encouraging your family to save and try to steer away from payday lenders, I think it'll save you more in the long run. So, for instance, I took out a Self credit card. Many people don't know about Self, which is a credit lender that you can start your credit. So, for instance, they allowed me to get a loan for like $500. Well, I only had to pay $25 a month. And they give you the term of the term of 12 months or 24 months. So if you don't have access of credit today, Self is a great option. You have the opportunity to build credit at an affordable rate. Instead of you working for your money starts to work for you. I think that's a good example of thinking the difference between a payday lender and a bank. What are the circumstances? Well, at a bank, for instance, if you have $1,000 in the bank, you can say, "Hey, I want to take a loan out on that $1,000." Well, instead of paying 199% rate from a payday loan center, you will end up paying, if your savings account is paying, let's say 1%. Well, most banks do 2% above that. That's 3% interest rate. A lot of people don't understand the affordability of saving versus using a payday loan center. When you think about bad debt and the access to credit, Preenon, I'm curious. You talked about your dad and how, as an immigrant, some of the issues that he faced. How did he familiarize himself with the U.S. bank system? What were some of the things that he did to get access to credit? And so just like it may be some high school students on the call who may be immigrant or who may don't have financial access to credit today, how do you get familiar with that when you're not native to the Americas?
I'd say like the biggest thing for him was that he started out with a secured credit card. So if you're not familiar with how that works, but it's a credit card that you basically put $300 to $500 on, and you're basically borrowing from yourself. So you're taking if you made a purchase for $100, you're kind of taking that $100 from an area, and then you have to pay it back. But that original $300 to $500 is actually from from the money that you gave that company, and then you'll be able to get that back once you're past the secured credit limit. So my dad had to start with a secured credit card because he didn't really have credit when he came to this country. Then he was renting an apartment in Crystal, and so he did that, and then as well as he bought a used car, and then the interest rate was probably very high on it, maybe like 9-10%. But then what he would do is that he would pay it off quickly, and he did small amounts. So instead of buying the car that's maybe, 10 to 20 or $30,000, he bought one that's 5,000, knowing that he's going to have to pay back 6,000 or maybe 7,000, but he kind of did it quickly and then did it every month. And then he's never missed a payment. Like I've seen one time he was out of the country and he wanted me to tell him the amounts that he owed to write checks for. This is kind of pre-internet payment. And he's had credit cards for like 20 plus years that had missed payments zero. Card holder since 1998, and that's huge. And like now he's on an 840 credit score. And I remember when we bought the first new car that we ever purchased in 2000, and I think it was 2007. But the sales guy was like, "Your dad has really good credit," and I'm at the time I was like 12. Like I don't really understand what he's talking about, but I just knew that was important, right? And then later down the road when he bought another car 5 years later, it was the same thing. The guy's like, "You're so lucky, your dad's got great credit." And I was like, "Well, what happens if you have bad credit?" And he's like, "Well, then you're paying back 16-17%." um I know, like when it comes to the credit, some of you, it's really unfair, but for some reason, your parents do make a difference on how your credit is going to start off with. Legally, I think they tell you that's not true. I've just from my own experience and helping my friends open up credit cards and showing everybody's got a different limit. Everybody should start out at basically a $500 limit. You're 18 years old and you don't have any credit history or anything, but some of my friends have secured credit cards. Some of my friends limits is 1,000, and no one's co-signing on these. It's just straight up, and they're still getting different credit limits. And Kayman, you might be able to answer that because you're in compliance, and so it's I don't know what the reason is behind that, but it's just you kind of take what situation you have and you make the most of it. So if you are very fortunate to have like good credit and your parents are helping you and all that stuff, then just make it even better. Go from like good to great. Or if you're from great to go to excellent, right? Just moving up one step is huge, and then just keep going from there. Like if you're in the situation like my dad was, where he was at bad credit when he got here, not good, not quite bad, but not good. He took that to good, and then he took it to great, and then to excellent, and now he's at the highest credit you can, and you just make the most of what you can do. I know, like I gave a lot of information and towards maybe just a big overview. But if you're in high school right now, the things you should look into is getting a credit card. That's very important. Well, even before that, if you don't have a checking and a savings account, do that first. And then look at somewhere that's free. So like credit unions are great ones because they don't have minimums and they help you, or their fees might be lower if you are in that situation. Make sure to opt out. So there's a way that you, like, if you don't have gas and you're at the gas station and you swipe your card, if you let it, like if you have $5 in there and you get $10 worth of gas, you're going to get a $37 fee. You don't want that. Just opt out. Like it's better that maybe your account, it'll force you to look at your account if it's negative, right? So you swipe your card and you take it out and it doesn't go through. That's better. And then just keep an extra $20 in your glove box or somewhere hidden. So then if you did have an emergency, you have that money available. And then after that, I would say take a look into credit cards and then look for ones that are free. So like you don't need to get like even the Apple credit card's not bad. It's designed for somebody who's like very established or makes a lot of money. It's actually helps you. It like sends you a reminder like, here, pay this. If you don't pay the full amount, you're going to pay this much in interest. It's really well laid out. I typically recommend the Discover card. That's the one I started with. And then after that, take a look into like a Roth IRA or like a retirement account and how you can start. And then if you don't know what to invest in, like the S&P 500 is never a bad choice. And on top of that, it's like just to ask other people and use the resources around you of how you can connect with and what you should be doing. And then make sure you're properly using all these resources and tools. Like if you're using the checking and savings account and you're getting a bunch of fees and you're not doing it correctly, don't move on to the credit card. Wait, wait until you got the checking and savings figured out, and then move on to the credit card and focus on that. And then like I like to pay my credit card every 2 weeks. That way, when I get paid, my credit card's getting paid instead of every month. And then you got $1,000 in your account, and then but then your credit card's $1,000. It looks like you got more than you have. Instead, I'd rather just do it every 2 weeks, so then I'm just clean slate every time.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier where you were basically talking about racial inequities and relationships. Unfortunately, the way credit cards work today, there's specific marketing tools that basically look at your phone. They look at your spending habits, what you're looking up, and then they look at your zip code. This cellular device that you have tracks everything about you. It tracks your spending habits. It tracks where you go, where you live. And so some of these algorithms that they use, it's really based upon your activity. And so let's say, for example, if you bank today at TCF or if you bank at Wells Fargo, regardless of where you bank, relationship matters. So if you talked about your dad being or having a savings account of some sort and saving $200 a month, or you saving $200 a month, because you have that relationship with your bank, they will take opportunities on you. So if you say, hey, I've been a customer at so-and-so for 50 years, I've never had a overdraft, or I've been here for 3 years, they look at those type of things because they say, well, if you're profitable, then the bank is profitable. So really the question is, what type of bank is for you? Talking about your financial picture, there are many different types of banks. There are commercial banks, there's residential banks, there's mortgage banks. And so one bank that I particularly like to highlight, or actually two, you mentioned one of them, is a credit union. Those credit unions are usually, they actually have a special tax designation to where they can actually pay you more in interest than banks can. Credit unions pay interest to, are usually nonprofit, by the way. So they pay the interest that they make off loans, they pay it to you as a member. Banks actually pays their earnings to shareholders. And so it's those people who already have access to wealth. They already have access to different types of credit. So to even start at the basic level, credit unions is a great way. If you just have $100 a month, they turn that $100 into $110 at the end of that month. But banks, guess what? Banks are going to give you 50 cents of that $100. So that's just an example. Another type of institution is called a CDFI, and you can write this down, which is a community development financial institution. These institutions are geared towards those who have lack of access to credit, and for those who don't have access to basic financial products. So these specific banks are here for you. They actually have financial advisors that look out for your financial picture. They help you build wealth. They get you access to those credit cards. Instead of telling you, hey, go here, they are actually walking you through the process of how do you create a basic checking account? What account is best for you? Take out a $500 loan that would actually sit in a CD that would draw interest, and the loan that you take out, the interest, you'll actually be paying a piece to yourself. So relationship matters. And so I think it really goes back to where do you want that relationship? Google CDFIs, Google the reputation of your bank, go to something called the CFPB and type in complaints on Google. If you see that that you see comments that, well, I was charged an overdraft fee and I didn't know why, go look on those comments and see, well, maybe that's one of the reasons why you have an overdraft fee is because it was improperly submitted to you. There are opportunities where banks do make mistakes. And so relationship matters. Understand the reputational risk of your bank and how they are treating your customers today and how they treat you as a customer. And so going back to the relationship piece and credit cards, I think credit unions are the best way to go. Most people don't know that credit unions pay interest to members, not to shareholders. Banks, they pay their interest to shareholders, to those individuals who already have wealth. And so, Danae, I'll turn it back over to you, or Preenon.
Yes.
Maybe you have something to add. I want to be conscious of time.
Yeah, we have about like 2 minutes. We probably can go a little bit over if you have questions from participants. I do want to plug in this Social Dilemma on Netflix, going back to the marketing and how that happens. It's really interesting if you want to look at that, and how being on your phone, being on your computer, how they're actually like, there's another you, and they're trying to figure out exactly what you're looking at, how long you're looking at it for. So it's really interesting. So you can be aware, like, oh, I'm looking at this, and you might get some Target ads. You know, you go back on your phone and you're looking at mattresses or something, and then all of a sudden you have so many ads and links to certain things. That's the reason why. But I do want to be conscious of time. We are at about 1 minute, but if you have questions right now, you can go ahead and unmute yourself about anything that was discussed here today or anything else. We will be sending this link out on our social media pages and sharing it as well, so you can look back at this recording. But yes, I invite you to ask your questions now if you have any.
While we wait for a question, I would just like to add also, like, one of the biggest things when it comes to like, your financial journey is, you'll learn this along the way, is don't ever sign up for something right away. Like, don't just always wait, do your own research, ask around, even if they're like signs, say like fiduciary, which means like they have to look out in your best interest, or if they have good reviews or other things, but just ask around, like, make sure that that's actually the best fit for you. Maybe that they have good reviews because that product or whatever they did was really good for somebody else, but that doesn't necessarily means that it fits your needs. Like Edward Jones or Northwestern Mutual or Thrivent, I've mentioned them before. They're not bad companies. It's just that they're not the best thing for you when you're young. And a lot of these companies will try to get you in early because that's how they make the most money, is getting you signed up early on for the future, like for down the future. It comes with anything, you know, checking the fees. Like, even like my family bought a house recently, like the realtors are looking at the title companies, or the even, yeah, maybe this rate looks really good, but then you have to put this much down. There's always this thing called like a balance transfer. If you're in debt, you can, one of the biggest things people always talk about is refinance student loans. A lot of the time, it costs money to refinance your student loans. Don't ever make your federal loans private loans, because you'll lose so many benefits that are good for you. Yeah, you might get a lower rate. It's 4, instead of 4%, it's 2%, right? But in the long run, you would have had to pay a fee to transfer, as well as it's not going to be as forgiving. Like I was talking about, if you lose your job or something happens, those private companies aren't as helpful to you. So making your federal loans to private loans is not something you want to do. So just making sure that, ask around, you know, using different resources and making sure that this is the best decision, and never rush into something.